Tony Beets is out, and Parker Schnabel isn't wasting a second. The veteran miner has officially been banned from a major claim, and suddenly the gold that was once fiercely contested is wide open. Parker, eyes on the prize, mobilized his crew immediately, knowing opportunity waits for no one. Every shovel, sluice, and dredge went to work, the camp buzzing with urgency. Sources close to the site say Beets' ban didn't just leave a hole in the schedule, it left mountains of untapped pay dirt waiting to be claimed. Parker's team hit it fast, pulling high-grade ore that had been sitting idle under Beets' previous operations. By the afternoon, trucks were rolling with loads that would have made any prospector's jaw drop. Industry insiders are calling it one of Parker's smartest moves yet, turning a rival's setback into a personal windfall without a single shot fired. Meanwhile, Beets is sidelined, watching the golden opportunity slip through his fingers while Parker's crew methodically secures every inch of the claim. Like and subscribe to see how things unfold. It started just before dawn, when Tony's foreman arrived at the pit and froze mid-step. The giant dredge, the machine that had chewed through frozen earth for years, stood motionless. Its iron belly gleamed under the weak northern sun, but across its frame were bright red government seals. Operation halted. The stickers caught the wind, flapping like warning flags. Pumps were shut down, hoses cut, fuel drained. It wasn't just a stop order, it was an execution notice. Within hours, word spread through the valley. Crews from other mines gathered at the ridges, pointing and whispering. Someone said inspectors had found unauthorized expansion trenches. Others swore it had nothing to do with environmental codes, that it was political. One rumor even claimed Tony had defied a new territorial mining directive, brushing off an official warning with his trademark growl. "You don't tell me where to dig." For years, Tony Beets had been the living symbol of Yukon rebellion, a miner who played by his own rules and built an empire doing it. But this time, it seemed, the rules had fought back. His once thundering claim went eerily quiet. Dredges that had roared for miles now sat like frozen beasts, steam still drifting from their stacks. Workers stood around bonfires in disbelief. Tony himself was nowhere to be seen. Across the Klondike, in a warm operations trailer miles away, another miner stared at the breaking headline, "Beets operation suspended indefinitely." Parker Schnabel leaned forward in silence. His crew muttered behind him, waiting for a reaction. For a few long seconds, nothing, just the faint hum of heaters and static from the CB radio. Then slowly, the corners of Parker's mouth turned up. He didn't need to say it. Everyone in that room knew what the smile meant. The Beets ban quickly dominated every mining forum, radio channel, and social feed across the north. Veteran miners at Dawson bars argued over beers, some saying Tony had brought it on himself, others calling it a witch hunt. One old-timer slammed his fist on the counter. "You think they dare pull this on Parker? Not a chance. Beets scared the wrong people." The official report claimed Tony's shutdown was due to hydraulic overreach and failure to comply with reclamation orders. But a leaked memo, quietly circulating among insiders, told a different story. The document listed confidential complaints, noise levels, disrupted creek flow, even disturbance of potential heritage sites. The most suspicious part was the report's closing paragraph, marked Classified Review Committee, which mentioned third-party submissions. Someone, possibly a rival mining entity, had provided additional evidence leading to the closure. When reporters cornered him outside his claim, Tony didn't hide his rage. He ripped off his hard hat, snow-whipping his beard. "They call me reckless? I've been here longer than half these paper pushers have been alive," he shouted. "You want to talk pollution? Look at what the government's been dumping for 100 years. They pick me because I don't kiss their boots." The clip went viral within hours. Half the internet called him a legend standing against the system. The other half called him a dangerous outlaw who finally pushed too far. While YouTube channels and mining podcasts debated Beets' fate, Parker was alone in his office, lights dimmed, maps spread across the table. He wasn't ranting on camera or firing off statements. He was planning. His laptop glowed with satellite overlays, drainage maps, claim grids, lease boundaries. A red outline marked Beets Creek, the same rich channel Tony had sworn would make him the king of the North. Now that crown was dangling, waiting for someone bold enough to grab it. At midnight, Parker gathered his top foreman. "If Tony's out," he said calmly, "that ground's up for grabs. Someone's going to keep it running. Why not us?" The room went dead quiet. His crew glanced at each other, unsure if he was serious. Then Parker unrolled a new topographic print, color-coded with fuel lines, wash plant logistics, and route extensions. Every detail was already mapped. He wasn't just thinking about it. He'd been ready for this moment. They spent the next hours running simulations. How long to move a wash plant? How many trucks to reroute? What manpower it would take to restart an idle pit under new ownership? Every answer brought them closer to one conclusion. It could be done. Fast. By 3 in the morning, 2 of his scouts were already heading north in unmarked trucks. Their cover story, environmental assessment surveyors. Their real job, map the perimeters of Beets Creek, note access roads, and record any unsealed entry points. The next morning, before the sun even rose over Dawson City, Parker's assistant dropped a folder on his desk, a drafted proposal for a claim acquisition. He didn't even look up from his coffee. "Send it," he said flatly. Somewhere far away, Tony was still yelling into phones, trying to get through to the territorial office. Paperwork, hearings, appeals. It didn't matter. Bureaucracy moved slow, but Parker didn't wait. Because in the Klondike, opportunity doesn't knock twice. Snow drifted across the silent yard like ash from a dying fire. The once loudest mine in the Yukon was now a graveyard of frozen steel. Beets miners stood in the cold, silent and stunned, their breath steaming as they stared at the chains and warning tape stretched across the gates. Machines that once shook the valley with power now looked like fossils of an extinct age, half buried in frost. Tony Beets stormed through the yard, his boots crunching against ice, his voice echoing off idle excavators. He barked into his phone, switching between English, Dutch, and profanity, demanding answers no one was willing to give. "You shut down my ground without notice? You call this due process?" His words were swallowed by the wind, but his anger burned bright enough to melt the snow beneath him. Inside the equipment shed, mechanics sat idle, surrounded by silent generators and half-drained oil barrels. Paperwork covered every surface. Inspection reports, environmental citations, photographs of unauthorized discharge points. Tony tore one of the documents in half and slammed it to the floor. Cameras from the production team trailed behind at a careful distance, capturing the raw collapse of a mining empire. When Tony kicked a frozen hydraulic hose so hard it cracked, the sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. He turned toward the camera, eyes blazing. "They want a show?" he roared. "I'll give them a show?" Across the valley, the rumble of engines broke through the still air. Parker's trucks, bright yellow against the white landscape, were rolling. Convoys loaded with heavy equipment moved in formation, carving tracks toward Beets Creek. The sight hit Tony's crew like a punch. It wasn't just that their site was shut down, it was being replaced. No one had expected Parker to move this fast. Within hours of the ban, his lawyers had already filed paperwork under a newly formed company, Klondike North Ventures. On paper, it was a separate entity. In reality, it was Parker's latest weapon, his way of acquiring everything Tony couldn't defend. The legal filings were clean, airtight, and fast-tracked through channels Parker's team had prepared weeks in advance. They'd been watching, waiting, and the moment the government halted Beets's operations, the takeover began. While Tony's excavators sat motionless, Parker's crew was tearing open new ground just a few miles east. He'd quietly purchased the secondary leases, smaller tracts surrounding Beets' claim, that Tony used for access roads and runoff channels. It was a surgical move. By owning those side lots, Parker effectively boxed Beets in, cutting him off from potential expansion routes or bypass corridors. Haul roads were widened overnight. Power grids were extended toward the frozen valley. Parker's logistics team coordinated from a mobile command trailer, their radios alive with rapid chatter. Pump Line 3 connected, wash plant en route, north access clear. By the second night, floodlights illuminated the valley like a football stadium. Beets's idle dredge sat in the shadows, while Parker's machinery roared less than a mile away, its floodlights casting long beams across the snow. A drone camera captured the surreal contrast from above. Tony's frozen operation to the west, Parker's gleaming convoy to the east. Within 72 hours, the hum of Parker's heavy iron replaced the silence Tony left behind. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Monica Beets watched it all unfold. Her breath trembled as she gripped the binoculars. The glare of Parker's lights burned through the darkness, reflecting off piles of new gravel. "He didn't waste a damn second," she muttered under her breath, lowering the binoculars. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just a mining shift. It was an invasion. Tony, however, wasn't one to watch from the sidelines. Inside his office trailer, the walls were plastered with maps, geological charts, and old claim deeds. He stood over the table, his family and closest crew around him, faces drawn and quiet. "If they want a fight," he growled, stabbing a gloved finger into the center of the map, "they'll get one." He started calling old partners, names that hadn't been heard in the valley for years. Contractors, drillers, men who still owed him favors from past seasons. "You still got those pumps? Those hoses?" "I might need them," he said, his voice calm now, but edged with steel. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He pointed toward a faded mark on the southern edge of the map, a narrow gulch he once prospected and abandoned decades ago. "Nobody's watching that spot. No regulators, no cameras. We set up there, small scale, no paper trail. Off-grid." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Word spread fast among the inner circle. Tony Beets was preparing a shadow operation, an unregistered site, remote, unlisted, and far beyond official oversight. If the government wanted to shut down his name, he'd start again without one. The next few days, his trusted crew began disappearing from the main camp in twos and threes, heading out under the cover of darkness. Trucks with no decals, fuel drums with scratched-out labels. Rumors rippled through the mining community. "Beets is back at it. You can't kill a man like that." Meanwhile, Parker's operation was scaling up by the hour. Bulldozers leveled new ground, conveyor belts stretched across the flats, and the first test sluice produced coarse, bright flakes. Rich gravel, Tony had once sworn, held the biggest pay streak in the territory. For Parker, it was confirmation that his gamble was already paying off. But then, strange things began happening around his site. One morning, the perimeter sensors tripped, motion detected near the southern edge. The next night, his crew found tire tracks in fresh snow, leading up to a ridge where no company vehicle had gone. A few days later, one of Parker's supervisors looked up during a morning briefing and froze. A drone hovered overhead, silent, circling their new wash plant. It wasn't one of theirs. "Whose drone is that?" he shouted. The crew scrambled, watching it drift away into the mist. Parker stepped out from the trailer, eyes narrowed. He didn't need to ask who sent it. He knew. Far to the west, at the edge of the forest, Tony Beets stood on a rise beside his pickup, remote control in hand, the small screen on his controller reflecting Parker's sight in crystal clarity. The drone's camera zoomed in on Parker's excavators, the placement of his sluices, the route of his fuel trucks. Tony smirked. "Nice setup, kid," he muttered. "Let's see how long it lasts." As the Yukon winter deepened, the tension between the two camps reached a boiling point. Snow still clung to the tailings piles, but online, a storm had begun to rage. Hashtags like Justice for Beets trended across every platform within hours. Fans flooded comment sections demanding answers, angry that the so-called King of the Klondike had been taken down by paperwork and politics. Old clips of Tony barking orders and pulling gold from the mud resurfaced like battle flags, reminders of what real grit looked like. "Say what you want," one post read, "but Beets built this place from nothing." Others fired back, environmental activists applauding the shutdown as long overdue, calling Tony's operation a ticking ecological disaster. They pointed to drone footage showing oil-slick puddles, leaking tailings ponds, and the black scars of hydraulic mining along the frozen creeks. For the first time in years, Beets wasn't just a miner. He was the headline. Meanwhile, Parker's image began to fracture. Half the audience hailed him as a prodigy who seized opportunity with ruthless precision. The other half saw a corporate vulture picking over the carcass of a fallen rival. "He didn't wait for the dust to settle. He kicked it up himself," one blog wrote. Even among his own fans, the mood was uneasy. The idea of Parker taking over Beets' legacy ground felt like crossing an invisible line. But for Parker, momentum was everything. He'd learned from experience that the Yukon rewards the bold and buries the hesitant. Back in the production offices of Gold Rush, the chaos was pure gold. Executives smelled ratings. They dispatched every available crew northward, drones buzzing over the Klondike before the snow had even stopped falling. Rumors swirled that Discovery producers had already rewritten the mid-season arc to center on the Beets-Parker feud. Early cuts of footage leaked, clips showing Parker in a heated standoff with a government inspector shouting over the roar of machinery, "This isn't Beets' land anymore." The inspector's face said it all. Whatever was happening out there wasn't just mining drama. It was corporate warfare unfolding under floodlights and frost. Just as Parker seemed to have cemented his control, the narrative twisted again. A former Beets employee, anonymous but clearly close to the operation, leaked a series of photos to local media. The images showed rusted barrels stacked in a half-buried storage pit. Each was labeled in red stencil, "Cyanide residue, do not open." Within hours, headlines exploded. Toxic waste at Beets mine site, environmental cover-up. Commentators speculated that the discovery vindicated the shutdown order. Activists demanded criminal charges. Beets, cornered and livid, called into a local radio station to set the record straight. "Those barrels ain't mine. They were there before I even broke ground. Somebody's framing me." But the evidence didn't care about timelines. Investigators followed fresh tire tracks in the snow, leading straight from the barrels to a Beets mining transport yard. Receipts for diesel shipments matched the same dates. It looked bad, too bad. When questioned, Yukon authorities gave a careful non-answer, while Parker's camp stayed completely silent. Privately, Parker's legal team was already pushing hard for the regulatory board to make the ban on Beets' claim permanent. "If the ground stays locked," one insider whispered, "we control everything that surrounds it." As the scandal deepened, something strange happened. The satellite scans meant to verify the contamination levels picked up more than toxins. They revealed a massive subsurface anomaly beneath the frozen claim. A geological team hired by the Territorial Office shared preliminary data suggesting the presence of an untouched alluvial pay zone, dense, wide, and possibly loaded with tens of millions in high-grade gold. The kicker? It sat directly beneath the very section now sealed under government restriction. when Parker's foreman got wind of the data, new drills went up along the perimeter within hours. If the rules said he couldn't dig under the restricted zone, then he'd dig around it. Every borehole came back rich, gravel laced with flour gold, hints of something enormous lying just beyond reach. From his cabin, Tony watched the reports roll in, realizing the depth of Parker's strategy. The ban wasn't a punishment, it was bait. Parker had turned a regulatory wall into a shield, keeping Tony out while he mined the edges dry. Inside his now empty camp, Tony stood over old maps marked with decades of exploration data. He saw the pattern, the way Parker's drills traced the natural contour of the riverbed, inching closer to where Beets had once found his thickest pay streaks. The realization hit like a hammer. Parker hadn't just stolen ground. He'd stolen the legacy, the narrative, the very idea of Beets's dominance. "He's not just mining gold," Tony muttered, eyes hard under the flicker of a kerosene lamp. "He's mining me." Floodlights carved hard shadows across the frozen pit as Parker's crew worked through the night, engines howling against the cold. The air crackled with tension. Each clang of metal sounded like a countdown. Parker's men were pushing 24-hour shifts, hell-bent on reaching the subsurface vein before the thaw or before Beets made his next move. Cameras caught their silhouettes against the steam, faces caked with frost and determination. "No breaks," one foreman growled. "We're this close." Every bucket of pay dirt pulled from the edge brought them 1 inch closer to the gold beneath Beets' banned claim. But not everyone slept easy under the floodlights. Reports started trickling in from the night watch. Sensors missing, markers uprooted, hoses mysteriously cut. Drones scanning the site at dawn captured movement in the shadows, figures in dark parkas pulling survey flags and retreating into the tree line. Parker's communications tech intercepted stray radio chatter between camps, low static, coded words, and once, a clear voice muttering, "They won't see it coming." Within hours, both crews were accusing each other of sabotage. Fuel tanks were found drained. Bearings vanished from loader trucks. A rock slide mysteriously blocked the haul road. Local police arrived by midday, flashing lights against snowbanks. They called it an escalating territorial dispute, but everyone knew what it really was: a war for gold. Officers issued warnings, but neither side blinked. Too much pride was on the line. Too much gold. Both camps had crossed the point of no return, where the law was just background noise to the roar of machinery. Tony made his next move, not in the field, but in court. His lawyers filed an emergency injunction demanding the return of his mining rights, accusing the territorial office of unlawful seizure and corporate collusion. The filings named not only the government inspectors, but also Parker's shell company, Klondike North Ventures, as part of a coordinated effort to oust him. Within hours, Parker's team hit back with their own counterclaim, alleging defamation, interference, and sabotage. Suddenly, the Yukon Supreme Court became the new battleground. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters, fans, and camera crews swarmed the steps. Gold Rush producers leaned into the frenzy, teasing the trial of the Klondike in viral promos. Inside, Tony sat in his worn black jacket, glaring across the aisle at Parker, who, for once, wasn't smiling. Testimonies stretched for days. Environmental officers described leaks and missing permits. Mechanics spoke of damaged machinery. But the real shock came when leaked documents revealed shared board members between Parker's shell company and the environmental inspection firm that initiated Beets' shutdown. For a moment, the courtroom froze. The narrative flipped on its head. Had the ban been manipulated from the start? Was Parker's rise built on conflict of interest? His lawyers scrambled to frame it as coincidence. Corporate overlap, not corruption. But the damage was done. Public opinion split even further. Parker's empire started to look less like brilliance and more like a chess game played in the shadows. The judge, overwhelmed by the storm of evidence, media pressure, and public outrage, postponed the verdict pending further review. Both mining operations were placed under temporary suspension, frozen in more ways than one. Weeks passed. The camps emptied. Trucks sat half-buried under drifts. The Yukon went quiet. In his workshop, Tony sat alone among rusted dredge parts, staring at an old photo, him and his family, standing in front of the Paradise Hill plant before the chaos. "They think I'm done?" he muttered, voice echoing off steel. "Never." He began sketching blueprints on the back of a fuel invoice. Something new, something off-grid, something no one could touch. Meanwhile, Parker pushed forward in the opposite direction. With his northern claims locked in legal limbo, he pivoted southward. New ground, new machines, and even bigger production. Investors rallied behind him, but the shine had dulled. Whispers of backroom deals and insider manipulation followed wherever he went. His brand, the golden boy of modern mining, was now tinged with scandal. Even so, he refused to slow down. "Let 'em talk," he told a reporter. "The gold doesn't care." The Yukon Mining Board announced a full-scale inquiry into both operations, promising transparency and reform. But few believed it would end there. Insiders hinted that the next season could see the impossible, a secret alliance between the two rivals. The idea seemed absurd at first, but as costs rose and new environmental restrictions tightened, even enemies might find reason to unite. "Out here," one old prospector told a camera crew, "you don't beat the system, you learn to survive it." By spring, the legend had already taken root. Locals called it the Gold War of the Klondike, a feud that began with a ban and ended reshaping the balance of power across the valley. Historians compared it to the claim wars of the 1890s. Fans compared it to a soap opera with excavators. But those who lived it knew better. This wasn't just about gold anymore. It was about legacy. About two men too stubborn to quit, each carving his story into frozen earth. As the Yukon sun rose over the thawing creeks, both camps prepared for what everyone knew was inevitable: the next strike. The silent valley stretched between them, two empires preparing for whatever came next. Outside, the Yukon wind howled through the empty sluices, rattling the frozen pipes like bones. But beneath that silence, somewhere deep under the permafrost, a golden current waited, untouched, unseen, and now at the center of a feud that was no longer about dirt or profit. It was about pride, power, and the unspoken rule of the Klondike. If you hesitate, someone else will dig your dream right out from under you. Because in the Klondike, legends don't retire, they reload.